Inspired by my daughter's video tours of her garden, I've decided to try my first video tour of my garden in the heart of the Carolinian zone. I have removed all non-native species but one from my backyard, and we'll do a quick tour because it's a large yard. This is the shade garden. In here I have a lot of spring ephemerals, from trilliums, both red and white, to wild ginger, lots of other little things like false Solomon seal and the true Solomon seal. Right now, most things, because it's October, have died off. In this section where most of the trilliums are, it has become a bit overrun with all of the ostrich ferns, so many of those are going to come out. Right now, the only things with any flower, and they're almost done, is I have two small patches of zigzag goldenrod there and over here. In the center, I've got a number of things such as foam flower and some various wood violets, but of course these are long done for the season. These plants are celandine poppy, some call it. More commonly they're known as wood poppy. And there's a look-alike European version, but these are the natives. As we go through my garden, I've got some shrubs here. This is a spice bush. It has very fragrant foliage, and one year it actually had berries on it, but not this year. And I have a much larger spice bush at the back where it's moister, and it had no berries this year either. On this side, I've planted white baneberry and blue cohosh and red baneberry and a pagoda dogwood back in here and an elderberry, but neither of those are true natives. One is a very bright lime green, and the other was a piece of root left from when I had a black elderberry planted here. This tree is a volunteer. It is a black cherry, and it's probably 8 or 9 feet tall right now. And as you can see, I've dug around the base. I'm going to try to move that this fall once the leaves have gone, because there's no place for it to grow. These are some very large, very old maple trees. I'm fortunate that I have 4 like this, one on the other side of that fence, plus these 2, and then the one that my swing hangs from over here. From here, I'll head over to the waterfall garden. So here I have some blue flag iris, some cardinal flower, a volunteer blue lobelia, and then in the water itself this year I planted bog bean and a couple of arums. This little waterfall is so relaxing on a summer day. On that side of the falls I have bearberry, and I have barren strawberry, and it has nice yellow flowers in the spring, and I'm hoping it will fill in the area. They were just planted this spring, the barren strawberry, and you can almost see it poking above the rocks. In here I planted this fall a dwarf raspberry. It's supposed to only get about a foot tall. And then down in here I have some ferns. Those are bulblet ferns. This little garden here was new this spring. Originally this had been a sweetgrass garden, but after moving away for 4 years, I came home to 1 or 2 little sickly strands of sweetgrass. I think it was just too dry. So I've planted a number of things in here that will be in bloom in the spring and a little bit later on in the fall as well. I have butterfly milkweed, I have lanceleaf coreopsis, I have pale purple coneflower down here, some wild columbine. Over in that corner there is some purple prairie clover, and then for very early in the spring up in that patch I have prairie smoke, Geum-triflorum. My garden down here is a small second layer plateau, and this tree here is a dwarf chinkapin oak. Interestingly, this spring it was loaded in little wee tiny acorns. I've never seen so many on a tree, but 1 week they were there, the next week they were not. I'm thinking that they just somehow spontaneously aborted because there was no sign of any damage, and the acorns were not even as big as a small pea. This tree did actually have full-sized acorns when it was about 1 foot tall, the year after I had planted it. In this mostly sunny exposed spot, this late in the afternoon, it's getting shade from my Kentucky coffee tree, but I planted green milkweed. I'm very excited to see it grow. And this lovely shrub here, which is loaded in seed pods, is a shrubby St. John's wort. It was a volunteer, and I was concerned that it might not be the native because it was a volunteer, but in fact it turned out to be the native plant. And so my waterfalls comes down, and as you can see, maybe at this end of the waterfalls, the stones are wet from splash. And so the plan is for next spring, I'm going to excavate a number of these stones and dig a pit about 2 feet deep into them, put a liner in, fill it with peat moss and sand, and it'll go up to and include some of the splash zone, so it will constantly have moisture, and that will become my new bog garden. And down here in the corner, which is also often in sun except this time of day, I have prairie dropseed. I'm going to slip over to this side of the garden for now and go back up the hill a little bit. In the corner here by the stone, I have a red oak, and this tree is 2 years old. It was planted by the squirrels, and it is going to actually get moved out because, as you can see, it's under the canopy of the maple as well. So this tree will be out in the sun, and it's going to get moved out to about here. Next we have red aronia, or red chokeberry. It has lots of fruit, but the dirt birds don't really like it. Last year the fruit was still here in the spring on the plant while the new blossoms were out. As opposed to next door, I have a nannyberry, and those two shrubs were planted at the same time, and you can see the height difference between them. The nannyberry last year was loaded in fruit, and you can see the lovely blue fruit on the red stems. And it was there on a Friday night, and Saturday afternoon when I came out, there wasn't a single berry left. The birds had gotten them all. So this is definitely a keeper. It's actually had a few suckers. There's some coming up in here behind it, and I've removed some from out front and given them away because they were getting into the lawn. This lovely white oak is doing really well. It took a long time to get established, but now it seems to really like where it is. Probably too big for the nanny berry next door to it, but time will tell. And in here I have some blueberries for the birds. I got a handful off of them once, but that's it. And this is the 4th place on my property I've planted these. I kept moving them because they did not do well, but they obviously love this. I'm looking due north now, which means that these plants are facing south and get well protected and just enjoy the sunshine apparently. Over here I have a new blueberry bush. This is the low blueberry, the native one to here. I just put it in last fall and we'll see how it does. It came with a very healthy crop of poison ivy, which took me a while to eradicate. And in between I have a very rare in Ontario oak. This is a bare oak or shrub oak, and it is Quercus ilicifolia, only known of in one location in the province, which is over near Kingston somewhere. This was given to me as a gift. So not sure whether I'll keep it or donate it to the local university arboretum. And then my sassafras tree, this was dug out of a friend's pathway when it was quite small, and it took off. It's really enjoyed living here. It was badly decimated by Japanese beetles this spring, but seems to be recovering. Unfortunately, my red bud has also taken off this year and is shading out the sassafras. Of course, when I planted the sassafras, it was 10 feet away from the red bud, and I thought it might actually outperform the red bud. But the red bud is just loving it where it is, obviously, and doing very well. This shrub was 3 feet tall when I bought it, probably in 2006 or 7, and the top third of it died off the first year, and then the rabbits ate it to the ground the second year. So for the first 3 years this tree just got shorter and shorter, but in that time it set down some roots and now is doing exceptionally well. It's probably 20 feet tall and 30 feet across, and is gorgeous in the spring with all its flowers. Here we're looking at the first garden I planted and the one that got me interested in native plants. This garden was started with a wildflower seed mix, and when I saw California poppies and other things coming up in the mix, I started doing a bit of homework and discovered the beauty of native plants in Ontario, and have since then removed virtually all non-natives from this garden. This was a tall grass prairie garden with cup plant and purple coneflower and bee balm and another number of others, but as the canopy has closed over from these massive walnut trees and some trees, this is a northern hackberry that I planted, and this is my Kentucky coffee tree that I bought when it was about a foot tall, and actually had it growing in another part of the yard, but moved it here when it was about 3 or 4 years old. Those are now producing enough shade that this summer I pulled out most of the bee balm that I could find and the cup plants and some of the other taller plants. I'm going to now try to fill this bed with shade tolerant species. Although some of the things I have in here are new to me this year, so I have some wild blue phlox down here, Phlox divaricata, and those are just new. This is my first attempt at growing liatris. This is Liatris spicata, or dense blazing star. It is a sun-loving plant, and I planted a couple of them here and a couple in another garden. So those are new this year. The purple coneflower just about finished. Some nice seed heads forming. I leave these for the birds for the winter. I will clean up the garden mostly in the spring. And in this patch here, I have some other interesting things started. I've got down, tucked in, coming up amongst all of the black-eyed Susan is a white goldenrod called silver rod. That was new this year as well. And these are a New England aster that is finished blooming, but I'm really impressed with my black-eyed Susans. Unfortunately, I have two different kinds of black-eyed Susan here that were planted before I knew much about native plants, and I do not know the difference yet, so that's something I'm going to have to learn. Back in here, you can see the seed heads forming on Joe Pieweed, again another new addition this year. As I said, I was away for 4 years, and before I left I had planted some Canada goldenrod in this garden. And between it and the bee balm and the cup plants, when I came home, this garden had been taken over by those three. So last fall I did a major cleanup, pulled out wheelbarrow loads of plants, and then this summer I've removed even more as I transition it to a shade garden, or partial shade. And this is my other spice bush. You can see here, I think, this shrub is probably a good 12 feet tall and 20 feet across. Beautiful shrub. This lower part of my yard is moist most of the year, so there's lots of water down here and things do really well. This little patch here circled by the soaker hose, because I planted these at the end of a very dry week. I've put in some Ohio spiderwort and Goldie's wood fern. So hopefully that will do all right back in this corner in the shade of the spice bush. On this side of the pathway, this back corner is almost entirely ostrich fern. Great source of fiddlehead ferns in the spring, or fiddleheads rather, and looks really messy now. We did have a fairly dry summer. My gardens tend to get ignored except when I'm planting, so they look messy. I have a rather beat up looking lady fern here, and behind it I have white snakeroot. It's all in seed now, but this is a beautiful white flower for quite a while in the summer, and now has gone to seed. Underneath these staghorn sumac that I have here, I have planted some swamp milkweed, because this is the wettest part of my garden, but I wonder if it is has become too shady back here for these. I may have to move them out. And these ferns down here, I haven't taken the time to identify. They may be bulblet ferns. I'll have to take a look at it closer one day. I don't remember planting them there, but anything's possible. And then over here I have male fern, and behind it another lady fern. And over here we have a Christmas fern and more Christmas fern, all interspersed with sensitive fern, and the sensitive fern obviously likes it here. It's growing lovely. This is my so far one and only bottle gentian or closed gentian. I collected some seeds from it this year and spread them around, so hopefully we'll have some more next year. And then over here we have a volunteer obedient plant. The idea here with the cedars, eastern white cedar, is that I want this to fill in and become more of a barrier to the laneway that goes behind my property. I built this arbor so that the cedars would grow over it. Unfortunately, while I was away, either a large branch or just heavy winds destroyed the plastic lattice that I had over the one side. So I'm trying to decide the best way to repair that and build it again. Obviously the plastic doesn't stand up as well as I had hoped. And this was one of my first construction projects back here, was this gateway to the lane that runs behind my place. It's simply a municipal right-of-way and it gets seldom used, so that's nice. So over here we have some red osier dogwood, and my newest acquisition is leatherwood. Leatherwood is interesting because it has a bark that apparently is virtually unbreakable. It used to be used by First Nations people as string for their bows or for fishing line. Down here, planted in a location where I hope it will eventually climb up the sumac tree, is a glaucous honeysuckle. And tucked under here, we have a hart's tongue fern. That'll be the end of part one, because I see we're already over 20 minutes and I'm barely halfway around the yard. So we'll start up again in a moment.